Dennis had been looking forward to a peaceful evening. All he wanted was a chance to relax on the couch with his wife, Steph, without their energetic 8-year-old daughter, Pammy, interrupting every few minutes with another question, snack request, or imaginary problem. They adored their daughter, but an uninterrupted conversation together had started to feel like a luxury. One evening, Steph finally sighed and smiled. "I think it's time we signed Pammy up for the Girl Scouts." Dennis agreed immediately. "I'll take her tomorrow." The following afternoon, father and daughter headed toward the local Girl Scout registration center. Sunlight streamed through the windshield as Dennis tried to sound upbeat. "You'll have a great time," he said. "They've got a really cute uniform." Pammy frowned from the back seat. "What kind of uniform?" Dennis grinned. "A pink jumper, a vest covered with badges, white tights, and shiny Mary Jane shoes. You'll look adorable." Her expression only grew more stubborn. "Well," he continued, "there are crafts too. You can make bird feeders, paint projects, and all sorts of fun things." Still no reaction. "And the badges," he added enthusiastically. "Cooking, nature, dancing, teamwork, you can earn badges for almost everything." Pammy folded her arms tighter. "I don't want to go." Dennis let out a quiet sigh. "Honestly, if adults were allowed to join, I'd probably sign up myself." Pammy looked at him suspiciously. "Then why don't you?" He laughed awkwardly. "Because it's only for girls." Moments later, they arrived at the registration center. As soon as they stepped inside, Pammy pointed toward a large poster hanging near the entrance. "Daddy, look." The colorful sign announced a brand new policy. "Adult men welcome to join Girl Scouts." The poster showed smiling grown men dressed in pink jumpers and matching vests, proudly making crafts and participating in troop activities. Dennis stared in disbelief. Pammy slowly turned toward him with a knowing smile. "You said you'd join if you could." He immediately searched for an excuse, but none sounded convincing. "So?" she asked, "were you just pretending?" Not wanting to disappoint his daughter, Dennis reluctantly picked up the registration form, signed his name, and unknowingly changed the course of his life. Chapter 3. More than a dozen boxes of Chex cereal covered one side of the table. There were corn Chex, rice Chex, wheat Chex, chocolate Chex, cinnamon Chex, and even honey nut Chex, which hardly anyone ever seemed to choose. Around them sat bowls filled with popcorn, pretzels, peanuts, marshmallows, chocolate chips, gummy bears, and dried banana slices. Miss Heather smiled brightly as she addressed the troop. "Today's challenge is to create your own signature Chex Mix. Be as creative as you like, but remember, no tasting until everyone has finished." She paused with a grin. "And the person with the most impressive mix will earn the perfect mix badge." The room instantly grew quiet with concentration. Dennis looked around in disbelief. Only a short while ago these men had been talking about jobs, families, and everyday responsibilities. Now they were carefully debating which cereal blended best with marshmallows. "Chocolate Chex is the obvious choice," Gary announced confidently as he filled his bowl. Blake shook his head. "Not even close. Cinnamon gives it much more flavor." Nearby, Sebastian carefully arranged every ingredient as though he were creating a gourmet masterpiece rather than a snack. Dennis hesitated before adding a little of everything. His hands weren't shaking because of the activity. They were shaking because something about this place felt deeply wrong. When everyone finished, Miss Allison and Miss Heather examined each bowl with surprising seriousness. They sampled each mixture, discussed the balance of flavors, and evaluated every creation as though judging a professional cooking competition. Finally, Miss Allison raised one bowl into the air. "We have our winner." She smiled toward Sebastian. "Congratulations." Sebastian blinked in surprise before standing proudly. "You created a mix that's crunchy, balanced, and wonderfully creative." Miss Heather applauded. "You've earned the perfect mix badge." She escorted Sebastian into the same side room where Blake and Gary had disappeared earlier. 5 long minutes passed. When Sebastian finally returned, Dennis immediately noticed something had changed. The quiet, reserved man was gone. Instead, Sebastian rushed excitedly toward Blake and Gary with sparkling eyes and an enormous smile, clutching his new badge tightly against his chest. "Look what I got," he squealed happily. Blake gasped. "A special badge." Gary clapped enthusiastically. Now all three of us have one. The three of them gathered together, proudly comparing their badges and chatting with childlike excitement about where they would pin them onto their sashes. Dennis felt a chill crawl down his spine. Sebastian hadn't argued. He hadn't resisted. He had simply stepped into that room, and returned as someone noticeably different. Dennis lowered his eyes to the empty space on his own sash. What happens if I earn one? The thought sent a wave of anxiety through him. Before he could dwell on it any longer, Miss Heather clapped her hands once again. All right, Troop Blossom Breeze, she announced cheerfully. Next activity, circle story time. Dennis swallowed hard as he followed the others, wondering how much longer he could keep pretending that everything was normal.